I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural, really. But after what happened to me last summer, I can't explain it any other way. I've spent countless nights replaying everything in my head, searching for a rational explanation, but there isn't one. I'm sharing this story with you now because I need someone to hear it, even if you don't believe me. It all started when I decided to spend a weekend at a small, secluded cabin in the woods. I needed a break from city life. Too many late nights working, too much stress. The cabin belonged to a family friend who offered it to me, saying it was off the grid and just what I needed. When I arrived, the place was exactly what I expected, charming but rustic. It had a small living room with an old stone fireplace, a modest kitchen, and a single bedroom with creaky wooden floors. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service. The nearest town was about a 30-minute drive away. I was alone, and that's how I wanted it. The first day went by peacefully. I spent most of it reading on the porch and listening to the sounds of the forest. The air was crisp and cool, and the cabin had a comforting smell of pine and wood smoke. I cooked myself a simple dinner and went to bed early, feeling relaxed for the first time in weeks. That night, though, I woke up to a strange noise. At first, I thought it was an animal outside. Living in the city, I wasn't used to the sounds of nature at night. But as I lay there, I realized the noise wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the cabin. It was a faint scratching sound, like nails on wood. My heart started to race. I told myself it was probably a mouse, or some other small animal. This was an old cabin after all. I got up, turned on a flashlight, and checked the living room and kitchen. Nothing. The sound had stopped. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the noise. The air felt heavier, the kind of heaviness you feel right before a thunderstorm. But I convinced myself I was being paranoid and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. I spent the day exploring a nearby hiking trail and didn't think much about the noise. But when I got back to the cabin, I found something that made my stomach drop. The front door was open. I was certain I had locked it. I'm meticulous about things like that, especially when I'm alone. But there it was, slightly ajar. I hesitated before stepping inside, scanning the room for any signs of an intruder. Everything seemed to be in its place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been there. That night, the scratching came back. This time, it was louder and more deliberate. It sounded like it was coming from the bedroom walls. I sat up in bed, clutching my flashlight, trying to pinpoint the source. Then I heard it, a faint whisper. It was so quiet I almost convinced myself I imagined it, but the words were unmistakable. Get out. My blood ran cold. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the flashlight on and stayed under the covers, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. By the time the sun came up, I had convinced myself that I was just overtired and letting my imagination get the best of me. But things only got worse. The next day, I decided to leave. I packed my bags and loaded them into my car, but when I tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over. I checked the battery, the fuel gauge, everything I could think of. The car was fine the day before, but now it was completely dead. Defeated, I went back inside the cabin to figure out my next move. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the wooden floor of the living room near the fireplace, there were scratches. They looked like claw marks, long and deep, gouged into the wood, and they hadn't been there the day before. I felt a wave of panic. I needed to get out of there, but without a working car, I was stuck. The nearest town was too far to walk to before dark, and the thought of being in the forest alone at night was just as terrifying as staying in the cabin. As the sun set, the atmosphere inside the cabin grew oppressive. The air felt thick, and the shadows seemed darker, like they were alive. I lit a fire in the fireplace, hoping it would bring some comfort, but it only made the claw marks on the floor stand out more. Then the noises started again. Not just scratching this time, but footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth outside the cabin. I tried to look out the window, but it was pitch black. The only light came from the fire, which cast flickering shadows on the walls. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, just a gentle tap on the front door. My heart pounded as I stared at the door, frozen in place. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Whoever or whatever was out there wanted me to open it. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response, just more knocking. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace, my only weapon, and approached the door. The knocking stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, in the quiet, I heard it again. The whisper. "Get out." I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I couldn't stay in the cabin, but I couldn't leave without my car. I decided to barricade myself in the bedroom. I pushed the dresser against the door and sat on the bed, clutching the poker. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. By the third day, I was desperate. I decided to hike to the nearest town, no matter how far it was. But when I opened the front door, I found something that made my knees buckle. On the porch, written in the dirt, were the words, "You can't leave." What the villagers saw was a beautiful craft. Then, they saw the dead man. I've never felt such terror in my life. It wasn't just fear. It was despair. I was trapped, and whatever was tormenting me knew it. It was him. I was him. The gloom pressing in from behind. That night was the worst. The noises escalated. Scratching, footsteps, whispers. The cabin felt alive, like it was pulsing with some malevolent energy. The fire wouldn't stay lit, and the darkness seemed to press in on me from all sides. Then, around midnight, the bedroom door, the one I had barricaded, started to shake. It wasn't subtle, it was violent, as if someone was trying to break it down. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. When the shaking stopped, I heard the whisper again, clearer this time. "You can't leave." I don't know how I survived that night, but when dawn finally broke, I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't care about the car or my belongings, I just ran. I stumbled through the forest, not knowing where I was going, until I finally found a dirt road. A passing truck driver picked me up and took me to town. When I told the locals what happened, they exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, an older man, pulled me aside and said, "That cabin? It's cursed. Always has been. People hear things, see things. You're lucky you got out." I've never been back to that cabin, and I never will. To this day, I don't know what was in there with me. All I know is that it wanted me gone. Or worse, it wanted me to stay.